So I have called this first talk that mixed age groups are a blessing and not a curse. And I hope that that resonates with you. I really do. In this first session, we're going to be giving some thought to the background to tonight's theme, uh, why we do our work in mixed age groups, but more particularly why we do things in a particular way and some of the things we need to give attention to when we are working with a mixed age group together. And then later on, we're going to be looking more at how we can put that into practice. So some practical ideas and tips along the way. Now, it might put you off to discover that I'm not an early years specialist. In fact, I probably was the person who would run and hide under a cover when the under fives came along. I was very happy with teenagers. I was very happy with primary age. I was a primary school teacher for a while. But under fives terrified me until I became a mother and I realised that if I was going to do this thing, I really needed to get my head around the first 5 years of their life and not wait for them to reach the age I was comfortable with. So I think I probably invested quite a lot of time into working out what makes under fives tick, because it's not something that came naturally to me. And I hope that that would help you in your work with mixed age groups, because I think we have to recognise that when you get a group of children together, the under fives have very particular needs and things that they relate well to and things that they struggle with. So hopefully we'll explore that a bit today. I hope it hasn't put you off. Okay, so why are we exploring this theme? Well, I think it's quite simply because it's a reality for most of us. You probably won't be surprised to hear that in the 2016 church attendance figures show that on average there were only 9 children per Church of England church. So that's just illustrative, really, of a situation that I think would be true for many of us. And so the less children that you have in your group, the more likely it is that you will have a mixed age group. I have to share a little anecdote here. When I wasn't under 5, I think I was probably about 9. I came out of Sunday school one week and said to my Mum, I came second in the quiz. And she said, Becky, there are only 2 of you in your class. And that's perhaps the reality that we lived with for a while, with this idea of banding people into age groups, no matter how small the groups became. Whereas now perhaps the reality for most of us is that we're working with a mixed age group. It doesn't always work well. And we have to be aware of some of the pitfalls. And some of these are probably already familiar to you. I heard some in the video already. Sometimes we plug for the middle group and then we miss out the older ones and we miss out the younger ones. Sometimes we target what we're doing to the older children and the under fives scramble around on the floor, completely disengaged with whatever's going on. And sometimes we bring the teaching down and we end up losing the older ones' interest. Some of the pitfalls. But I think it can work well. Actually, I think there's real joy in mixed age groups. Now, we have this common understanding that the best model for our work with children, when I was planning this, I was thinking particularly about our Sunday groups, because I think this is the group where we're most likely to have mixed age groups together. And we have that understanding of this model of Sunday school, or whatever we've chosen to call it more recently, where we have a large group of children in small age-banded groups. So we may split it to 5s to 7s. We may have split it even smaller sections than that. And that's certainly been the norm within living memory. But I don't know if you're aware that that's actually quite a recent development. Now, it is beyond living memory. None of us are old enough to remember this being brought in. But it was only at the start of the 20th century when the Sunday school movement was adapted and remodeled and reworked. And there was lots of wisdom that was taken on board from the education system, that children learn best when they are grouped together in particular age bands. That's true to a point, but we're not actually a school educating children. We want to teach them about God. We want to teach them the Bible, but we're more than that. We want to be a place where they can encounter God, a place where they can discover together a place where they can worship together. And that's not something that's limited by age bands. We do, however, need to let our children grow. We know that children grow physically, they grow emotionally, we know they grow intellectually. I don't know for you if you've spotted some of your children recently, after a while, after the last few months. My nephew seems to have shot up in the time that I haven't seen him. And as much as we're letting them grow physically, we also need to enable them to grow spiritually. And I think this is one of the things we need to be aware of. Now, by nature of the fact that we're here as people who work with mixed age groups, we will be as concerned for our 8, 9, 10-year-olds as we will be for our 3, 4, 5-year-olds. We've come here to look at this particular issue, but we won't favour those children. We'll be aware of all their needs. Now, I want to share something with you that Yvonne Morris, who is the Children and Families Ministry Advisor for the Diocese of Oxford, has been working through. And I have her permission to share this with you this evening. But I want to flag up that I know this is a work in progress, and I have urged her to make this a fuller piece of work that perhaps will end up in a book form. But I'm just going to share a little bit of that with you today. So she starts by calling this a theology that grows, children's understanding of God and children's ability to encounter and make sense of the God stuff grows and develops over time. And she looks at these first building blocks for our under fives. So these are truths that an under 5 needs to know. God made me. God knows me. God loves me. I can know and love God. Now, they're both incredibly simple and deeply profound. And I do a lot of my work with unchurched children and adults. I'm involved as a messy church leader. And I find a lot of older children who've never discovered those truths. But if we're thinking about children who are growing up perhaps in a church environment, they are the first step right there. Now, beyond that, she goes into older children, thinking about things like, God is part of my story and I'm part of God's story. Beyond that too, I'm testing things I thought when I was younger and I'm leaving some of them behind. Now, I wonder what else you'll add to that and what you think your children need as they grow. But I think that's something we really need to be aware of in mixed age groups, that actually we're very aware of what our very small children need. And we're also looking for opportunities for our older children to grow. Finally, from now, I want to share with you something that some of you may already be familiar with, particularly if you use the Roots resources. This was something that really spoke to my heart when I found it, and it's the work on spiritual style. For those of you who haven't come across this, it's the same as the idea that we have different learning preferences, that we have different ways that we connect with our intellectually. There are also different ways that we connect with God, and you can find out more about this on the spiritual on the Roots in the website. If you just search for spiritual styles, there's so much good stuff there, and there's a couple of handouts particularly about under 5s and also mixed age groups. It's really helpful. But the reason why I flagged this up is that and it did come through the stories on the video earlier, that sometimes a 4-year-old in our group will have more in common with a 7 or 8-year-old in our group than perhaps 2 7-year-olds may have. And I think that's really valuable, that actually what we do is present to children opportunities to connect to God in different ways. Time has whizzed away. I hope that's a helpful starting point for us as we move through this evening. So earlier we were looking at why we're looking at this subject and perhaps why we do things in a particular way. And already in those discussions we've just had, we've talked about some of the things we can do, how we can answer this how question. How do we do this? And I want to share more some principles that we can apply, because obviously we haven't got time to deal with everybody's particular situation. And that's very much the case, that all of us bring our own experiences to this, our own context. We all have different ways of doing things because of our own preferences. The makeup of our groups will all be different. And so some of us will have very broad age range, perhaps one child in every age bracket. Others will have a couple of under fives and a lot that are at the other end of the group. It's also true that our groups will change over time. And it will be interesting to see when we come out of this season what the makeup of our groups are. And I think we need to press pause before we pick up where we dropped off, and think about reshaping our group, mindful of where they've been the last little while, what experiences they've had, and what their makeup, their preferences are now. So I really want to not try and address everybody's individual situation now, but rather to highlight some principles that we can all consider in our own context and how we apply those to ourselves. So some questions that's helpful to think about as we do this. Now, I would suggest that it's actually really hard to keep a mixed age group all together all the time. And I think this has been said at other times already this evening. Now, you may well be in the same space. It may well be that you've got a couple of adults with this mixed group in one room, but actually it's very hard to keep your under fives engaged with your older children for the duration of the time that you're running your activity. Anyway, here's some questions for you to think about. When in your session will you gather together? Perhaps it will work well for your group to share the story together. Or perhaps it will work well to pray together. Perhaps it's the refreshments time. We've talked about that need for social interaction between the group. So perhaps that's the best time. And I'd ask you to think about when are the best times for your children to be together, to learn from each other, and to share this experience together. And that will be different for everybody who's engaged with this evening. Another question to consider. Would it work to offer some of the activities simultaneously? Now, quite often we have our group and we start at the beginning. Perhaps we start with refreshments, and then we tell the story, and then we do the activity, and then we pray, and perhaps we have an action song, and off we all go. And what I want to suggest is that sometimes it might work better to offer some activities at the same time. Now, again, we've talked about different preferences. When I was teaching, when I discovered this way of working, that you could have a choice of things out, this was a revelation to me, and I loved it. And I tried to share it with colleagues who were absolutely mortified, and it didn't work for them. So what I'm not doing here is saying this is the way to do it. I'm flagging up this is a way to consider and see whether this helps your group. But this also gives space for the idea that we can let children encounter God in different ways using those spiritual styles. It gives space to think about having those very simple pieces of equipment, open-ended, free choice, the Lego table or the Duplo, the drawing, whatever it is, simple. It doesn't necessarily mean we've got to plan, photocopy, print, cut out 19 different activities to be done at the same time, but that we give children a choice over what they do at that time. And within that, you will have the child who whizzes around every activity in, 5 seconds flat, and you will have the child who meticulously sits for the duration. So that's one way I'd like to suggest that we offer things a bit differently. It also frees you up, perhaps, so that you can have conversations at a more one-to-one level with children in your group. So you can talk to the very young children at their level, and you can talk to the much older children about the things that they're accessing during the session. Alternatively, if you do prefer to run the group sequentially, then I would suggest that you might like to set out some play materials that are available throughout your whole session. So I know in the Roots materials there are suggestions of play things you can leave out there that relate to the theme, but it could just be a simple basket with some props that can be played with by a child that retell the story. I have a pet hate when we visit other churches of my children being handed the Thomas the Tank Engine colouring book. It is to me the ultimate bugbear, because I want my children to be able to engage with what's going on. And when we're thinking about our under fives, we want them to be able to engage with what's going on at their level. So perhaps for our under fives, the thing that they may need, is a simple basket of toys that relate to the story and they can play with at their level while the story washes over them. Now, whatever story resources we're using, we need to look at everything we have available to us and pick the best thing for our group. What we can't be doing is telling the story in 3 different ways. Okay, we're not trying to replicate the model where we have streamed age brackets. We've got to pick the bits that work best for our group. So whatever resources you're using, I would encourage you to look at everything you have available to you and make the choice about which story best suits your children. So here is, just to illustrate here, I'm showing you some of the resources from Roots, and I'm not expecting you to be able to read the tiny print there, but I'm just showing you that we have this script that's written for the older children together with a way of telling it. We also have a more simple way of telling the story for younger children. And you may look at both of those and think, oh, actually, my group would really love dressing up. They'd all love to have headdresses on. That would work fantastically. Or you may think, oh, my children hate dressing up. We could all sit round in a circle and tell the story this way. And however we're choosing to do that, being mindful of the different age groups we've got, we can tell the story in a very, very simple form, like we've talked about earlier this evening. Simple messaging with deep, profound truths. And then perhaps we might want to extend just slightly for our older children, maybe ask a direct question or an open-ended, wondering question that they can all engage with at their own level. Maybe we might have a little bit of extra information. Oh, did you know that this part of the story connects to this thing we did last month? There's little extras that we can add in that manage to hold us all together in that. Now, finally for now, we've talked a lot tonight about normal life, and we're all craving that, I know, desperately. But I think it's also really helpful for us to be mindful of present circumstances. Zoom screen fatigue is very real. I hope you're not feeling it tonight. You're all doing really well. Screen fatigue is really great, and it's not great, it's really big. And it's particularly true of our under fives. Ask any parent of a 3-year-old how they're getting on engaging with church at the moment, and you're likely to get the same response. So I think for our under fives, we need to be very mindful of this and whatever we're providing as a church. And it may be a phone call to a parent just to reassure them that their child is not the only child who struggles to engage online. That might really speak to their heart. It might be that you can offer some practical advice if you're working with your church leadership. You know, this Sunday we're putting out a service and this is the story we're using. Maybe you can include a line about, oh, do you know what? Your child might really appreciate having this story basket with these things that they can use in there. And although we're not meeting in mixed age groups at the moment, our children inevitably are meeting in mixed age groups because they're in their family groups. So this is a time where they're going to be learning from each other, worshipping together, encountering God together. So I would certainly see our role at the moment very much as taking the pressure off parents and lowering expectations, or making expectations more realistic in terms of practical, but opening our eyes to the possibilities of what God can do and how God can speak to our children's hearts right now. I've also just flagged up there for you something which I think Claire's going to share a link with you, something that Roots is making available that you can share with your own families, and they make use of resources that were written originally for under fives, but again have worked on this family scale, and I'd encourage you to have a look at those. And they're a quick win. You can go away, print them off, and get them out to your families. I hope that helps. I hope that that's given you some principles to think about rather than here's the answer, this is how to do it. I would just encourage you to take some time to reflect on your own circumstance and what situation you're in right now, and what are the key principles that you need to apply there.